Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton Analisis AWANI. Derita Rohingya, itulah yang anda tonton sebentar tadi dalam klip video itu. Dan di mana pembelaannya? Ini kerana kalau seseorang dan sesebuah masyarakat itu diiktiraf, maka mereka akan mendapat hak-hak tertentu. Tetapi uniknya dalam kes masyarakat Rohingya ini dan sukarnya untuk diselesaikan kerana mereka tidak diiktiraf dalam mana negara yang mereka berada, iaitu Myanmar itu sendiri. Oleh itu saya ingin meminta izin untuk bicara dalam bahasa Inggeris. I would like to welcome Mr. Amal D. Chikera, the head for Statelessness and Nationality Project for the Equal Rights Trust. And Amal has been looking at the Rohingya issue for a long, long time. So my point to start with is, if you are not acknowledged by your own country, then in the post-colonial era of nation states, that's a very, very fundamental issue to claim any rights. And hence, the rights would almost be non-existent in practicality of being given to you, because you are not just seen, or you're invisible in the eyes of the people governing that nation state. So is that one of the basic right, simple way to discuss the crux of the issue in Myanmar and Rohingya?
That's a very good question. I think one way of the way that my organization, the Equal Rights Trust, addresses the Rohingya issue is we see it very much as a statelessness problem, and as statelessness caused by discrimination. The Rohingya are a vulnerable minority in Myanmar, and they've been discriminated against even before they were stateless. And then the act of making them stateless in 1982 through this citizenship law was itself a discriminatory act, and since then it has been used as a basis for further discrimination.
Amma, before we go there, because it can easily be a legal discussion, it can easily be a refugee discussion, it can also easily be just a humanitarian aid discussion. But before all that, because to me those are mechanics of helping, the basic situation right now is they're not even treated as people, and that's why death happens, murder happens, rape happens, displacement happens. So you hear secondary or even first-hand accounts of what's the situation there. So maybe you can pick one that affects you the most, that you have heard, to share. Then we go to the mechanics of how should we look at this issue.
As in, you want me to go through a personal story?
Tragic stories that you have heard yourself.
I mean, there are so many, and it's a very vulnerable group, and we've heard stories of children who've been separated from their parents, and people who've been forced to cross the border to Bangladesh and then only to be pushed away from Bangladesh. People who tried to enter Thailand and to be then trafficked to Malaysia. So there are a lot of very heartbreaking human stories, and I mean it's difficult to pinpoint one.
But this is the 21st century. You know, in the 20th century in Africa or certain other parts of the world, it's easier to imagine that a large group of people, hundreds of thousands, can be systematically discriminated against, not just by psychological intimidation, but by brute physical force. But this is the 21st century, and we're talking about a Myanmar government that now wants to be known and recognized internationally for its openness. So why is this still happening, and why aren't more stories like this gaining the attention of the world?
I mean, if I may, I'd like to go back to your opening point, which is the impact of not having a nation in this post-colonial world of nation states. And if we look at this post-colonial world from a human rights framework, we see that the right to a nationality is a human right. So if you are stateless, you've been deprived of your right to a nationality. What we also see is that when you don't have a nationality, your enjoyment of other human rights is also severely compromised. So the Rohingya are vulnerable to discrimination, they are vulnerable to problems with their liberty and security of the person, their freedom of movement, they are vulnerable to attacks and attacks with impunity, and this all stems from this statelessness. So to answer your first question in a nutshell, there is an international framework which, if adhered to, takes us beyond the nation-state system and obligates states to treat people, regardless of whether they are nationals or not, in a particular way.
On ground, in Myanmar, in Rakhine or anywhere else that the Rohingyas are. So we're saying that because they are not acknowledged as citizens, so if I kill a Rohingya person today, not having citizenship doesn't mean that I treat you badly. So there must be more than that. There must be deep animosity or hate or whatever it is.
There are deep historical reasons, and we must understand this from the perspective of Myanmar being a country that's been ruled by a military dictatorship for 50 years. And in those 50 years, the military dictatorship had complete control of the media, complete control of what propaganda and what messaging went out to the Burmese people.
So the Burmese people see the Rohingya as
they see them in a particular way. They see them in a particular way. And,
what way is that?
And they see them very much as illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. That is the narrative of the...
Which is very not true.
It's not true. That was the narrative of the military regime, and unfortunately we see that narrative continue even today, despite the fact that Myanmar is now opening up as a country. So they're seen as illegal migrants from Bangladesh, and they're seen as a threat to Burma.
I have to go for the first break, but once we are back, so what's the best practical way, fast enough, to solve this problem? Because we've been hearing this for decades, trickling here and there, but now with internet and more, we can hear it more and more faster and faster. There's billions of US dollars of investment pouring into Myanmar, even as we speak. From the Southeast Asian countries or even beyond, from the United States of America, whatever else. So we've seen the model of how if you don't better your governance record for human rights or whatever else, the international pressure can be that let's figure out a way to tie investment, economic investment, and governance of human rights, for example. Is this a practical solution? What are your own organization's view of this? Let's talk about that after this short break. Anda masih menonton Analisis Awani dan kita masih membicarakan tentang derita masyarakat Rohingya yang tidak diakui sebagai warga negara di mana bumi mereka berada, iaitu di bumi Myanmar. Dan dalam konteks itu, mungkin elok jika kita telusuri apa yang diperkatakan di media sosial tentang perkara ini. Kalau Hilal sudah bersedia, teruskan Hilal.
Baik, terima kasih Cik Kem. Dalam hari ini, trending di media sosial ialah berkenaan dengan laporan dari Dhaka Tribune yang mana melaporkan Bangladesh mahu pelarian Rohingya yang berada di sana untuk pulang semula ke Rakhine. Dengan itu, Bangladesh sedia untuk bantu pembangunan sosioekonomi Rakhine di Myanmar selepas bermesyuarat dengan penasihat Amerika Syarikat Judith Safkin semalam. Dan jumlah pelarian Rohingya terus meningkat dengan anggaran 500,000 orang yang kini berada di Bangladesh, dan kerajaan Bangladesh sudah tidak mampu lagi untuk menanggung beban ini. Dan jika anda dapat saksikan dalam gambar yang ditweetkan ini, cerita yang sama dikongsi mengenai pelan menghantar pulang pelarian Rohingya dari Bangladesh lebih awal. Bagaimanapun, pelarian harus setuju dengan penghantaran tersebut, dan apabila mendapat jaminan mereka boleh pulang tanpa berasa nyawa mereka terancam. Jadi bagaimanapun, penasihat Amerika Syarikat menyatakan penghantaran pulang Rohingya tidak mungkin akan berlaku dalam masa terdekat. Ini kerana situasi di sana masih tidak selamat dan kerajaan Myanmar tidak mengambil sebarang inisiatif untuk menangani konflik ini. Ratusan Sami Buddha Arakan mengadakan protes terhadap cadangan ini, yang mana cadangan memberikan kerakyatan kepada rakyat Rohingya dan mahu semua badan NGO dan pertubuhan bangsa-bangsa bersatu untuk keluar dari Myanmar dalam tempoh seminggu. Dan dalam protes itu juga, ekstremis di Rakhine bertekad mahu menghalau dan menghapuskan kaum Rohingya dari bumi Myanmar selepas keganasan yang melampau pada 2012 di mana sekitar 60,000 kaum Rohingya menjadi pelarian dalam tempoh 6 bulan iaitu Jun dan Oktober 2012. Dan jumlah ini adalah jumlah yang paling tinggi untuk tempoh 20 tahun. Cik Kem.
Hilal pergi ke Syria, mungkin lepas ni boleh pergi yang lebih dekat kerana derita mereka juga tidak kurang hebatnya.
Ya betul, insya-Allah.
Okay. Itu kita saksikan nanti bila Hilal ada masa dan peluang untuk pergi mungkin ke bumi Myanmar dan melihat ke Rakhine. My colleague Hilal was just telling us about how even on the social media there's a lot of chatter and discussion about Rohingya, and in Bangladesh they're saying that they want to send them back, but they will help with the economic development. But all this can't happen if the crux of the issue in Rakhine, in Myanmar itself, is not settled. It's not only the issue that between the Rohingya people and the government of Myanmar, but also the ethnic Rakhine and people from a different faith than the Rohingya who are Muslims in Myanmar. So it's an ethnic issue, it's also a religion versus another religion issue, it's also the nationality issue. At the end of the day, how would an NGO such as your own outfit can help solve this as fast as you can, together with other NGOs, of course. And the irony is, billions of US dollars pouring into Myanmar, and yet these things are still happening.
Yeah, we certainly don't make any claims to have any magical solutions.
Yes.
It's a very difficult question. Let me first address the issue of economic investment.
Yes.
And we see that there's a conflict of interest here because the international community is rushing to benefit from the opening up of Myanmar. And it's the same international community that has a responsibility to protect and a responsibility to ensure that there is pressure brought on Myanmar in the context of the Rohingya. So, I mean, if we look at what happened over the last 2 years, we saw lots of sanctions being lifted by the Americans, by the European Union. And these included sanctions which were imposed on the basis of the human rights situation and where the Rohingya was specifically mentioned. And despite no real progress being made, these sanctions were still lifted, which sends a real mixed message to Myanmar and which tells them that they are free to get away with things, in a sense, because the international community, at the end of the day, is not going to jeopardize its investments and its relationship with Myanmar over this. So that's a very dangerous development, and we need to work with the international community. And at the end of the day, international community is made up of individual states. So as a Malaysian organization, you may want to ask what your government can do. Similarly, other states should see what they can do to collectively address this situation.
Because it is not a Myanmar problem only anymore.
No, it's not.
The Rohingyas are spread out from Bangladesh right up until Malaysia. Some have even gone through maybe work in Singapore and Indonesia.
So, I mean, there's a massive population in Saudi Arabia that not many people know about. So they are very widespread. And in most of the countries that they live in, as refugees, unfortunately these countries don't have strong refugee protection frameworks. Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia.
So again, they don't even have rights in other countries.
Exactly. So their statelessness is a reason for discrimination even when they leave Myanmar.
I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, I want to go deep into your area, which is activism on this, and also the NGO psyche of things, because at the end of the day, I think that there's a big difference between the consciousness of nation states on this matter as compared to the NGO's consciousness. And this is reflected, maybe my colleague Hila didn't go into the more gory side of what's on the social media. You know, you hear stories through reputable blogs that has been always focusing on these issues about almost ethnic cleansing kind of level, that the last time, if I have gone across it very meticulously, was in the Bosnian case. But here we hear of a pregnant woman being attacked and killed and raped and stuff. So how do we bring these gaps closer together? Because we need all interested parties and stakeholders in this to solve this particular issue. But it still seems like it's very difficult for us to move this issue beyond activism of the civil society. So how would you and your fellow colleagues inside the civil society movement and organizations and NGOs go to the next level in trying to solve this matter? Because otherwise, if investments are pouring into Myanmar and these things are still allowed to happen, then that's the best leverage that the Rohingyas will not have.
Yeah.
Economic sanction is one of the most potent weapons in the 21st century. So let's discuss that after the short break. Terima kasih kerana anda masih menonton Analisis Awani. Saya ingin meneruskan perbincangan dengan tamu pada malam ini. I would like to speak now in English again. And I was just reading off, I was making the point where even on the internet now, we can see blogs that are very responsible, that have been reporting on this for a long, long time. And there are very serious reports of atrocities being done, notwithstanding the elderly, the women and the children. So we've seen how bad this can get in the last century in Africa. We've seen how bad things can go out of hand even in a peaceful country like Malaysia if people forget that unity is very crucial. But the Rohingyas in Myanmar, they don't even have unity. Every other people, it seems like the way the reports are coming out, are against them. Nobody is helping them much. A lot of people are on their case, killing them, raping them, looting them, burning down their houses. So it seems like the obstacle for any NGOs or civil society organizations is so high. But what positive are you looking at? And what more can be done in the positive sense?
I think in terms of civil society advocacy, I think it's important to ground our work in a human rights framework, because the human rights framework isn't our framework. It's a framework that applies to all of humanity, which was negotiated by states. And something I think that nation states forget or choose to forget is that international human rights law and the state accession to human rights treaties is in itself an act of state sovereignty. So by Malaysia, for example, ratifying the Convention on the Rights of the Child, Malaysia is saying that it has taken a decision as a sovereign state to protect children in its country, in Malaysia. Similarly, Myanmar, by ratifying the Convention on Discrimination Against Women, is saying the same thing.
So is this a systematic discrimination?
It is.
Just like apartheid in South Africa before?
It's systematic. Whether it amounts to apartheid or not is debatable, but it's definitely systematic. And
by the government?
By the government and by forces who are able to act with impunity. But the point I'm trying to make is that the only way to address this successfully is through a human rights framework and through engaging with states on human rights issues and challenging states.
So you think the Association of Southeast Asian Nations like ASEAN must do more?
Yes, definitely.
What can they do more in your eyes?
I mean, I think ASEAN needs to take a stronger stance on the issue. Myanmar is
next year is an ASEAN community.
Is an integral member state of ASEAN. It will have the chair of ASEAN, and as a region, there are implications of what's happening with the Rohingya. It has impacts on all ASEAN countries. So it's in the collective interest of ASEAN.
And if the American administration is turning on its wheel to refocus on Asia and Southeast Asia, so this must be the litmus test. If the American administration doesn't really solve the Rohingya issue by applying economic sanctions and pressure, then this is the case.
I mean, I would hesitate to single out America or one state, particularly one Western state. I think there's collective responsibility here, and definitely within the region more can be done, and more can be expected of the UN system as a whole. Rather than single out individual states, I think we need to look at the UN as a framework which has been set up to address problems like
If we look at the problem of Palestinians,
Yeah.
you know, it started in 1948 because a new state have got to be created, and the creation of that new state transgress on the present state that was there in 1948.
Yeah.
So that issue has been going on for 6 decades, using countless resolutions of the United Nations, and it's still not being solved.
I mean, the Rohingya issue has been going on for as long or longer. These are very deeply entrenched human problems.
But wouldn't you agree that at least in the Palestinian case, they've got more airtime, they've got more publicity, but the Rohingyas
When I started working on the Rohingya issue, it was in 2008. The media never spoke about them.
Yes.
It's only in 2012, after
Exactly.
this violence, that the media started really picking up on the issue.
So is that a positive?
It's an impact of a very newsworthy story, and it's a reflection of how the media works.
So that must come up more
I
and
don't know
more.
whether it's necessarily a positive,
Okay.
because it's an indictment on the media that the issue wasn't really raised before 2012, when the situation of the Rohingya was still very disparate.
Okay.
So I think there's responsibility all around. I mean, we can speak
Okay.
about the responsibility of human rights organizations. Definitely the media needs to report in a more responsible manner as well. We need to look at states to acknowledge their part of their role on this issue.
I have to end, but why isn't Aung San Suu Kyi crying this cry, battle cry for the Rohingyas?
That's something which many of us working on this issue
Is asking.
were disappointed by and initially surprised by.
Okay. Amal, you have to come again whenever you're in town. Good luck with all the discussion at the conference that you are in until tomorrow at in KL. Terima kasih banyak kepada anda. Hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri. Semua platform yang ada melalui platform-platform Astro Awani seperti Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, ataupun terus muat turun aplikasi Mudalih Astro Awani, iOS dan juga Android. Di Astro Awani kita tidak akan berhenti membincangkan isu ini. Malah Azlinariah, editor Astro Awani juga sedang mengambil PhD dalam bidang yang membabitkan isu Rohingya. Sekian, selamat malam dan terima kasih.